The night air felt wrong as Alice Morgan hurried down Fifth Avenue, clutching her daughter Madeline's small hand. Every instinct screamed danger as she noticed 3 men in dark suits following them, speaking rapidly in a language she couldn't understand, but her 8-year-old daughter somehow could. "Mommy, those men are talking about hurting someone," Madeline whispered, her blue eyes wide with fear as she tugged at her mother's coat sleeve. "They said there's a bomb in the black car with the flags on it, the one for the important man." Alice's heart hammered against her ribs as she spotted the gleaming black limousine idling ahead, American flags mounted on its hood, a distinguished man in an expensive suit approaching it. The bodyguards flanking him scanned the area with practiced precision, completely missing the threat hiding in plain sight. "Stay right here, baby," Alice instructed, crouching down to Madeline's eye level, knowing what she had to do despite every logical part of her brain screaming to walk away. "Mommy's going to help that man, but I need you to stay by this store window, okay?" Abandoning all caution, Alice sprinted toward the limousine, her waitress uniform visible beneath her open coat, her voice rising above the Manhattan traffic. The bodyguards immediately moved to intercept her, hard eyes and hands reaching inside jackets, but she kept shouting as the man turned toward the commotion. "Don't get in that car," Alice gasped, pointing toward the 3 men who had now frozen in place, their expressions darkening. "My daughter understands Chinese. Those men said there's a bomb." Max Carter, feared leader of New York's most powerful crime family, narrowed his eyes at the breathless woman before him, registering the terror in her expression as genuine. With a subtle hand gesture, he redirected his security team toward the suspicious men who were now backing away, their plan clearly disrupted. In the chaos that followed, a decision was made in seconds. Carter's lead bodyguard yanked open the limousine door, discovering the explosive device hidden beneath the seat. The timer showed less than 2 minutes remaining, its red digits counting down toward what would have been the mafia boss's certain death. "Get everyone back," Carter commanded, his voice cutting through the pandemonium as his men cleared the area, the abandoned limousine sitting like a ticking time bomb. The woman and her daughter were whisked away by his secondary team just moments before the explosion rocked Fifth Avenue. Alice held Madeline tightly against her, shielding her daughter's eyes from the fireball that had engulfed what would have been Carter's final ride. She hadn't meant to get involved in whatever dangerous world this man belonged to. She just couldn't let someone die when she had the power to prevent it. "You saved my life," Carter stated flatly when he approached them minutes later, his piercing gaze moving between mother and daughter with calculated interest. "How does your child speak Chinese well enough to understand assassins?" "She just understands languages," Alice replied, her arm protectively around Madeline's shoulders, suddenly aware of the dangerous attention they'd drawn. "She always has, ever since she was very small. We hear something once, and she just knows what it means." "You should have walked away, pretended not to hear," Carter continued, his voice low and dangerous, though something in his eyes had softened when he looked at the little girl. "You've now made yourself known to very dangerous people who will wonder why their plan failed." "I couldn't just let you die," Alice answered simply, straightening her spine despite her trembling hands, her waitress name tag catching the flashing lights of approaching police cars. "I don't care who you are or what you do. Nobody deserves that." Carter's expression remained unreadable as sirens wailed closer, his decision already made about these 2 civilians who had unwittingly entered his world. With a snap of his fingers, his remaining security team created a protective circle around them, hustling the mother and daughter toward a secondary vehicle waiting down the block. Alice's modest 1-bedroom apartment in Queens felt impossibly distant as Carter's men escorted them through the marble lobby of his penthouse building. The difference between her life as a waitress struggling to make rent and this man's world of crystal chandeliers and armed guards could not have been more stark. "You'll stay here until we determine who was behind this attack," Carter informed them, as the elevator opened directly into his penthouse, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. "It's not safe for you to return home. Those men saw your faces." Madeline's eyes widened with wonder at the lavish surroundings, temporarily distracted from the danger as she took in the enormous aquarium spanning an entire wall, exotic fish swimming lazily through illuminated blue water. Her delight was the only bright spot in this nightmare Alice hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. "I have a shift tomorrow morning," Alice protested weakly, already knowing it was futile as she clutched her worn purse containing exactly $27, all she had until payday. "We can't just disappear from our lives because we helped you." Carter's cold laugh held no humor as he removed his tailored jacket, revealing the shoulder holster and gun beneath that confirmed what Alice had already suspected about his profession. His eyes, calculating and intense, assessed her with unnerving precision as he poured himself a drink without offering one to her. "You're no longer working as a waitress," he stated with finality, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. "I've already arranged for your apartment to be packed up and your resignation to be submitted. As far as the world is concerned, you and your daughter have left New York." Alice felt her indignation rise despite her fear, stepping forward with hands clenched at her sides. "You can't just decide to upend our entire lives without our consent. We're not your property because we helped you. You became my responsibility the moment you chose to get involved," Carter replied evenly, something unreadable flickering in his eyes as he set down his glass. "Those men were Chinese triad assassins. They don't leave witnesses, especially not child witnesses who can understand their plans." Madeline had wandered to the window, her small hand pressed against the glass as she gazed at the city below, seemingly oblivious to the tension between the adults. "It looks like stars have fallen into the buildings," she murmured with childlike wonder, her innocent observation cutting through the hostility. Carter's expression softened fractionally as he observed the girl, something almost vulnerable crossing his features before the mask of control returned. He pressed a button on a sleek panel, summoning a woman who entered silently through a hidden door in the wall paneling. "This is Mrs. Reynolds," Carter explained as the elegant older woman nodded respectfully. "She'll show you to your rooms and bring whatever you need. Clothes, food, toys for your daughter. You're guests here, not prisoners, but you cannot leave for your own safety." Alice wanted to argue further, but found herself exhausted by the sheer unreality of their situation, the events of the night catching up as adrenaline faded. She simply nodded, taking Madeline's hand as they followed Mrs. Reynolds down a hallway, lined with what appeared to be original artwork worth more than Alice would earn in several lifetimes. "Why did those men want to hurt Mr. Carter?" Madeline asked once they were alone in their luxurious guest suite, her innocent question hanging heavily in the air as she climbed onto a bed larger than their entire living room at home. "Is he a bad person too?" Alice carefully considered her response, unsure herself of exactly whose world they had stumbled into, but certain it was one filled with danger and power beyond anything in their experience. "I think he's a complicated person, sweetheart, like most grown-ups. But what matters is that you helped save his life today." As moonlight streamed through the windows of their gilded cage, Alice stared at the ceiling, wondering how their act of compassion had led them into this strange new reality. Somewhere in this same building, a man whose life they had saved was making decisions about their future without their input. 3 days passed in luxurious isolation, with Carter notably absent as Alice and Madeline adjusted to their temporary home. The news reported extensively on the gas line explosion on Fifth Avenue, with no mention of assassination attempts or the mafia boss who had been the target. "Your daughter's gift is extraordinary," Carter stated without preamble when he finally reappeared, watching as Madeline conversed fluently with his Russian housekeeper in her native language after hearing it only once. She's what linguists would call a hyper-polyglot, but her ability goes beyond anything documented. Alice tensed protectively as Carter studied her daughter with undisguised interest, uncomfortable with his analytical gaze. "She's not a science experiment or a tool. She's just a little girl who happens to have a special ability with languages." "A little girl who saved my life," Carter corrected, his voice softening slightly as he knelt to Madeline's level, addressing her directly for the first time. "Do you know why those men wanted to hurt me, little one?" Madeline regarded him solemnly, her innocence untainted by knowledge of the criminal world he inhabited. "Because you have something they want, and they think hurting people is how to get things," she replied with a child's simple wisdom, making Carter blink in surprise. "My security team has eliminated the immediate threat," Carter informed Alice later that evening after Madeline had gone to bed, his casual mention of elimination sending chills down her spine. "But I've discovered this attack was orchestrated by someone in my own organization, someone who knows about you both." Alice's heart sank at this news, the brief hope of returning to their normal lives vanishing like smoke. "So we're still in danger, and now from someone close to you who knows where we are," she summarized, fighting to keep her voice steady despite her growing fear. Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flash of something like guilt crossing his features before vanishing behind his controlled expression. "I'm not accustomed to owing debts I cannot repay, but saving my life has put you and your daughter in a position I wouldn't wish on anyone." "We didn't ask for payment," Alice reminded him, surprising herself with her boldness in addressing this dangerous man. "We just did what any decent person would do, what you should have done if the situation were reversed." Something shifted in Carter's eyes at her words, a crack appearing in his hardened exterior as he considered her statement. Decency isn't a commodity in my world, Ms. Morgan. It's a liability that gets exploited by people willing to cross lines you won't even approach. Then your world is broken, Alice replied simply, rising from her seat to stand before him without fear, her maternal protectiveness overriding her natural caution. And if you really want to repay us, find a way for Madeline to grow up without being hunted because of what she did for you. Carter studied her with newfound respect, impressed by her courage, despite knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. There's only one solution I can offer that ensures your safety and allows me to honor my debt, he said finally, his tone suggesting he'd reached a difficult decision. Alice felt a chill run through her as she waited for his proposal, unprepared for the words that would change everything. You and Madeline must become part of my family, publicly, officially, and permanently, with all the protection and privilege that entails. Become part of your family? Alice repeated, stunned by Carter's proposal, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. You can't possibly mean marriage. We're complete strangers from entirely different worlds. Carter's expression remained impassive as he poured himself another drink, the ice clinking against crystal in the tense silence. In my position, appearances matter. A sudden wife and child would explain your presence and provide legitimate protection that no one in my organization would dare challenge. You're asking us to pretend to be your family so you can protect us from enemies you created, Alice clarified, her voice tight with disbelief as she paced the luxurious living room. To completely surrender our identities and freedom for a lie. A shadow passed across Carter's face as he set down his glass, something almost like shame briefly visible in his eyes. I'm offering the only solution that guarantees your safety. A business arrangement with clear boundaries and expectations. Nothing more. Alice laughed bitterly, running her hands through her hair in frustration. A business arrangement? That's what you call asking a woman and her child to bind their lives to a criminal empire as human shields? As far as the world would be concerned, we met months ago, fell in love quickly, and married privately, Carter continued, ignoring her outburst as he laid out his plan with cold efficiency. Your daughter would have my name, my protection, the best education money can buy. The weight of their impossible situation pressed down on Alice's shoulders as she stared out at the glittering city below, a world away from the modest life she'd built through years of hard work. She thought of Madeline, who deserved safety and opportunities Alice could never provide on a waitress's salary. What happens when you tire of this charade? She asked quietly, turning to face him with clear eyes that saw through his practiced control. When we become inconvenient to your real plans or your real relationships. Carter's expression hardened, an almost imperceptible flinch revealing her words had struck a nerve. There are no real relationships in my world, Ms. Morgan. Only strategic alliances, useful connections, and an endless parade of people wanting something from me. And what would you want from us? Alice pressed, needing to understand the full terms of this Faustian bargain before even considering it. Beyond the convenient explanation for why we're suddenly living in your fortress? The question hung heavily between them as Carter considered his response, his calculated expression giving way to something more honest. Your daughter's linguistic abilities could prove valuable in certain negotiations, and your perspective is refreshingly different from those in my usual circle. You want to use my 8-year-old child as a human translator for your criminal dealings? Alice's voice rose with protective fury, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. That is absolutely never happening. Not for any price. Carter's eyes narrowed at her defiance, unused to being challenged so directly. I'm not proposing to put her in danger. Quite the opposite. But her gift could serve legitimate business interests while remaining completely shielded from my other activities. There would have to be rules, Alice stated firmly after a long silence, hardly believing she was even considering his outrageous proposal. Non-negotiable boundaries about Madeline's involvement, my autonomy, and an exit strategy when the danger passes. As morning light spilled across the penthouse, they reached a tentative agreement, a marriage of convenience with strict parameters, designed solely to protect a mother and daughter who had saved a dangerous man's life. Neither could have anticipated how this reluctant beginning would eventually transform them all. 2 weeks later, Alice stood in what was now technically her bedroom, staring at her reflection in a mirror that cost more than her car. The simple white dress she wore for their private ceremony felt like a costume for a role she hadn't auditioned for, but couldn't decline. You look beautiful, Mommy, Madeline exclaimed as she twirled in her new blue dress, blissfully adapting to their changed circumstances with a child's resilience. Are we really going to live here forever with Mr. Carter? Alice crouched down to her daughter's level, smoothing a stray blonde curl from her forehead with gentle fingers. We're staying here until it's safe for us, sweetie. And remember, you'll need to call him Max now, at least when other people are around. The whirlwind fake courtship story had been carefully constructed, documents backdated, and photographs strategically created to support their narrative. Alice now possessed identification, credit cards, and legal papers claiming she'd been Mrs. Alice Carter for 3 months, following a whirlwind romance. I don't know how to be the wife of someone like you, Alice admitted to Carter that evening as they prepared for their first public appearance at a charity gala. I've spent my whole life avoiding men with power because I've seen what that power does to the women around them. Carter paused in adjusting his cufflinks, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. You don't need to be anything but yourself. Your authenticity is what will make this arrangement believable to those looking for cracks in our story. Alice's nervous fingers fumbled with the clasp of an obscenely expensive diamond necklace, a wedding gift that felt more like a collar. I can't even put on jewelry that costs more than everything I've ever owned. How am I supposed to convince hardened criminals I'm your besotted bride? Allow me, Carter offered, stepping behind her with unexpected gentleness, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he secured the clasp. The secret to surviving in my world is simple. Observe everything, reveal nothing, and always maintain plausible deniability. The electricity of his touch lingered on her skin as he stepped away, their eyes meeting briefly in the mirror, with an intensity that caught them both off guard. Alice quickly looked away, reminding herself this was merely an arrangement of necessity, not the beginning of something real. The gala proved to be an elaborate performance where Alice was introduced to Carter's business associates and rivals alike, their curious gazes assessing her worth and authenticity. She smiled through gritted teeth as men kissed her hand, while their eyes calculated what leverage she might provide. You're doing remarkably well, Carter murmured against her ear as they danced, his hand warm against the small of her back, guiding her through steps she'd never learned. Half the room believes I've finally found my weakness, and the other half thinks you're my most brilliant strategy yet. Alice maintained her smile despite her discomfort with the scrutiny, her waitress training unexpectedly useful in dealing with difficult people. Which half is correct? She asked quietly, genuinely curious about his assessment of their situation. Carter's eyes darkened as he drew her fractionally closer, his voice pitched for her ears alone. I haven't decided yet, he admitted with rare candor, the admission startling them both as the music swelled around them. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Madeline formed an unlikely bond with Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper who had taken a genuine shine to the precocious child. They baked cookies together in the massive kitchen, the older woman delighted by Madeline's ability to follow her instructions in perfect Russian. The boss has never brought a child into this house, Mrs. Reynolds confided as they waited for the cookies to cool, her weathered hands showing Madeline how to make paper cranes. It changes things, softens the edges of a place built for power, not comfort. Returning from the gala, Alice found Madeline asleep on the sofa, surrounded by paper cranes, a sight so normal and innocent amid their extraordinary circumstances that it brought tears to her eyes. Carter stood silently beside her, his expression unreadable as he observed this glimpse of childhood he'd never experienced. She makes paper birds for everyone now, Alice explained softly, reluctant to wake her daughter. She believes they carry wishes and protection, a little magic in a world that often feels too harsh for someone so small. We have a problem, Carter announced 1 month into their arrangement, his voice tight with controlled fury as he strode into Alice's private sitting room. Someone has been feeding information to the Chinese about your daughter's abilities. They're planning to take her. Fear clutched at Alice's throat as she set aside the book she'd been reading, rising to her feet with maternal panic. Where is she now? Is she safe? She demanded, already moving toward the door where Madeline was supposed to be having lessons with her new tutor. Carter caught her arm gently but firmly, stopping her headlong rush. She's secure with my most trusted men. I moved her the moment I received the intelligence, he assured her, something in his expression suggesting personal investment beyond their agreement. Who would betray you like this? Alice asked once her breathing steadied, trying to understand the complex web of loyalties and rivalries that now endangered her daughter. I thought your people were afraid to cross you. Carter's jaw tightened as he poured them both a drink, pushing one toward her with the understanding she needed it. My Lieutenant Paul has apparently been working with the Chinese triad for months, He sees your daughter as leverage in a power play against me. Alice accepted the glass with shaking fingers, the amber liquid burning a path down her throat as she swallowed. I knew this arrangement was dangerous, but I never thought they would target a child directly. What kind of monsters are these people? The same kind of monster I've been, Carter replied with brutal honesty, self-recrimination clear in his voice as he stared into his drink. Power recognizes no boundaries. Not age, not innocence, not basic humanity, if it stands in the way of control. A silent understanding passed between them in that moment. Whatever their differences, they were united in their determination to protect Madeline from becoming collateral damage in a war she never chose. The fragile trust they'd built over weeks of cautious coexistence solidified into something stronger. We need to move you both immediately, Carter decided, already on his phone issuing rapid-fire instructions to his security team. The penthouse is no longer secure if Paul has been compromised. He knows all our protocols, all our safe houses. Within 30 minutes, they were being escorted through the service elevator to an armored SUV waiting in the underground garage, Madeline clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit as she blinked sleepily. The child's trust in them to keep her safe was a weight Alice felt in her very soul. "Where are we going?" Madeline asked as they sped through the city, her small hand gripping Alice's tightly, sensing the tension despite the adult's attempts to appear calm. "Is it because of the bad men again?" Carter surprised Alice by answering directly, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it when addressing Madeline. "Yes, little one. Some bad men are trying to find us, but I promise you they won't succeed," he vowed, the intensity of his promise unmistakable. The safe house was a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, deliberately unremarkable and registered under layers of shell companies that even Paul couldn't trace. As they settled in for what might be days of hiding, Alice noticed Carter checking his weapon with practiced efficiency, the reality of their danger impossible to ignore. "I need to teach you how to use this," Carter stated matter-of-factly that evening after Madeline was asleep, placing a small handgun on the table between them. "If something happens to me, you need to be able to protect yourself and your daughter." Alice recoiled from the weapon, her pacifistic nature warring with her maternal instinct to protect Madeline at any cost. "I've never touched a gun in my life. I don't believe in violence as a solution," she protested, though her eyes remained fixed on the lethal object. Carter's expression softened with understanding rather than mockery, surprising her once again. "Before meeting you, I would have considered that naive. Now I see it as the strength that makes you different from everyone else in my world," he admitted, the compliment unexpected in its sincerity. 3 tense days passed in the Brooklyn safe house as Carter's loyal men hunted for Paul and his Chinese allies. The cramped quarters forced an intimacy none of them had anticipated, with Carter taking the sofa while Alice and Madeline shared the single bedroom. "You should sleep," Alice suggested, finding Carter awake at 3 a.m., studying blueprints and security reports spread across the kitchen table. "Exhaustion leads to mistakes, and we can't afford any of those right now." Carter looked up with tired eyes, his usual immaculate appearance disheveled after days of constant vigilance. "In my world, sleep is when they come for you. I learned that lesson at 19 when my father's enemies came in the night and left only me alive." Alice sat across from him, pouring herself a cup of the coffee he'd been nursing for hours. "You never talk about your past or how you came to be," she hesitated, unsure how to delicately reference his criminal empire. "A monster?" Carter finished for her with a humorless smile, pushing aside the papers to focus on her. "My father was old-world mafia, believed in codes and honor even in criminality. I watched those principles die with him when rivals decided rules no longer mattered. The vulnerability in his admission created a bridge between their worlds that all their forced proximity hadn't managed to build." Alice found herself seeing the man behind the dangerous facade for the first time, understanding the crucible that had forged him. "We're going to have a child," Alice blurted out suddenly, the secret she'd discovered just before the betrayal finally escaping her lips in this moment of unexpected connection. "I found out the day before we had to leave the penthouse. I'm pregnant." Carter froze completely, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, an expression of genuine shock breaking through his careful control. "Mine?" he asked in disbelief, setting down the cup with less than his usual precision, liquid sloshing over the rim. "Yes, yours," Alice confirmed quietly, watching his reaction carefully, unsure herself how she felt about this unexpected development. That night after the Brennan merger celebration, we both had too much champagne, and our arrangement became less professional. The memory hung between them, a single night of vulnerability after weeks of growing tension, both of them breaking their own rules about maintaining emotional distance. Neither had mentioned it since, pretending it had never happened despite the subtle shift in their interactions afterward. "A child changes everything," Carter finally said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "It means this isn't temporary anymore. It means permanent decisions, permanent targets on all of you if my enemies ever discover the truth." Alice placed her hand over his on the table, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him outside of their public performances. "I'm not asking for anything beyond what we already agreed to. I just thought you should know before we make our next move." Dawn was breaking outside the safe house windows when Carter's phone buzzed with the message they'd been waiting for. Paul had been located at a warehouse near the docks, preparing for what appeared to be an imminent kidnapping attempt. The time for hiding was over. "I won't ask you to forgive what I'm about to do," Carter told Alice, as he checked his weapon one final time, his expression hardening into the dangerous man she'd first met. "But everything I do from this moment forward is to ensure that you, Madeline, and our unborn child never have to fear again." Alice watched him transform before her eyes, the gentle man who had discussed his past with her vanishing beneath the armor of a crime boss, preparing for war. "Just come back to us," she whispered, surprising herself with the depth of emotion behind her request. As Carter left with his most trusted men, Alice felt the weight of their complex situation settling around her like a mantle. Whatever moral qualms she'd harbored about their arrangement had evolved into something far more complicated, something that felt disturbingly like belonging. The warehouse operation had been swift and decisive, eliminating the immediate threat to their family, but leaving Carter with difficult realizations about his organization. Trust had been fundamentally broken, requiring a complete restructuring of his empire from the ground up. "I'm dismantling certain aspects of my business," Carter announced 6 weeks later as they sat in the garden of his Hamptons estate, their temporary home, while the penthouse underwent extensive security renovations. "The highest-risk operations, the ones most likely to create enemies we can't predict or control." Alice looked up from her book in surprise, studying his face for signs of deception, but finding only resolution. "What prompted this decision?" she asked cautiously, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "You did," Carter replied simply, his gaze softening as it moved from her face to her hand. "You, Madeline, and this child deserve more than a life built on constant vigilance against the next threat. You deserve some measure of normalcy, of safety." Snow began to fall gently around them, the first of the season, creating a momentary bubble of peacefulness in their chaotic lives. Madeline's delighted squeal broke the silence as she abandoned her drawing to catch snowflakes on her tongue, her innocent joy infectious. "I never wanted this life," Carter confessed quietly, watching Madeline with an expression that bordered on wistfulness. "My father's death left me little choice. It was either take control or be eliminated as a loose end. But I always told myself it was temporary." Alice reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with an ease that would have been unimaginable months ago. "Maybe it's not too late to choose something different. Not completely legitimate, perhaps, but something that lets you sleep at night without a gun under your pillow." "I've been exploring options," Carter admitted, turning to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Legitimate businesses with strategic partners who don't ask too many questions about initial capital. Real estate, import, export, specialized security consulting." The transformation in their relationship had been gradual, but undeniable, from reluctant protector and unwilling protectee to something that increasingly resembled a true partnership. The pretense of their arrangement had developed roots in genuine respect and understanding. Madeline had flourished despite the danger, her linguistic abilities now complemented by private tutors in music and mathematics, revealing talents that would have remained undiscovered in their previous life. She spoke freely to Carter about her dreams of becoming a diplomat someday, a future he privately vowed to make possible regardless of the cost. Inside the estate's library, Carter had created a special collection of books in 12 different languages, watching with pride as Madeline effortlessly switched between them during their evening reading sessions. These quiet moments, away from business calls and security briefings, had become sacred to him, glimpses of the childhood he never experienced. Alice discovered unexpected strength within herself, no longer the frightened waitress, but a woman who challenged Carter's decisions when necessary and supported him through the difficult dismantling of his criminal enterprises. Her natural empathy balanced his strategic mind, creating a formidable partnership that his business associates had quickly learned to respect. The three of them had begun taking Sunday drives through the countryside, Moments of normalcy that felt both foreign and precious to Carter, who had never allowed himself such vulnerability before. During these excursions, the heavily armed security detail following at a discreet distance was the only reminder of the world they were trying to leave behind. "There's something I need to ask you," Carter said suddenly, dropping to one knee in the gathering snow, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Something I should have asked months ago, before all the paperwork and pretense." Alice's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at him in disbelief. The man kneeling before her barely recognizable as the cold crime boss who had once calculated her value as a strategic asset. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice catching. "Asking the woman I've grown to love if she would consider making our arrangement real, not for protection or appearances, but because I can no longer imagine a life without you and Madeline in it," Carter stated, opening the box to reveal a ring far more tasteful and personal than the ostentatious diamond she'd worn for show. Tears blurred Alice's vision as she processed his words, the genuine vulnerability in his expression more valuable than any jewelry. "You do realize I've already legally been Mrs. Carter for months?" she teased gently, buying time as her heart caught up with events. "On paper? Yes," Carter acknowledged with a smile that transformed his usually stern features. "But I'm asking for something paper can't capture. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, a real one, with all the complications and compromises that entails." Madeline watched from a few feet away, snowflakes gathering in her blonde hair, her eyes wide with understanding beyond her years. "Say yes, Mommy," she encouraged with childlike directness. "He makes the nightmares go away and teaches me words in Italian when you're sleeping." The simple observation from her daughter, the secret kindnesses Carter had shown when no one was watching, expecting nothing in return, was what finally broke through Alice's remaining reservations. With hands that no longer trembled in his presence, she reached for the man kneeling before her. "Yes," Alice whispered, watching joy transform his face as she slipped the ring onto her finger, replacing the showy symbol of their arrangement with this token of something genuine. "But on one condition. Our child grows up knowing only this version of you, not the man I first met." Spring arrived with new beginnings as Alice's pregnancy progressed, and Carter's business transformation took shape. The penthouse that had once felt like a gilded prison now became a true home, filled with Madeline's laughter and preparations for the baby, due in summer. "The nursery is finished," Carter announced proudly, leading Alice with her eyes closed into the room that had once been his home office. "Mrs. Reynolds and I worked on it while you were at your doctor's appointment yesterday." Alice gasped as she opened her eyes to find a fairy tale forest painted on the walls, complete with twinkling lights embedded in the ceiling to mimic stars. "It's magical," she whispered, deeply moved by the thought and care evident in every detail. "Madeline helped design it," Carter explained, his arm slipping naturally around Alice's expanding waistline. "She insisted her little sister would need enchanted trees to keep her safe while she sleeps. Apparently she's quite certain we're having a girl." The former crime boss who once calculated every interaction for strategic advantage now spent evenings helping Madeline with homework and discussing baby names with Alice. The transformation in him was so complete that his remaining business associates barely recognized the man they'd once feared. "I finalized the last property transfer today," Carter mentioned one evening as they prepared dinner together, a domestic routine that had become precious to them both. "Everything is legitimate now, still profitable, still powerful, but nothing that puts us at risk." Alice paused in chopping vegetables, setting down her knife to face him fully. "Are you satisfied with the change, truly? Do you miss the power you had before?" she asked directly, needing to know if resentment lurked beneath his apparent contentment. Carter considered her question with the honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. "I miss the adrenaline sometimes, the rush of absolute control," he admitted, "but it's nothing compared to what I've gained. A family worth protecting the right way." Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of the doorbell, an unexpected sound that immediately put Carter on alert despite months of peace. Old habits died hard as he motioned for Alice to stay in the kitchen while he checked the security monitor. "It's Paul's wife," Carter said in disbelief, his expression darkening at the mention of his former lieutenant, who had died in the warehouse operation. "She's alone and looks desperate." Against his better judgment, Carter allowed the woman entry, keeping Alice and Madeline safely distant as security thoroughly checked her for weapons or devices. Her tear-streaked face and haunted eyes spoke of months of hardship since her husband's betrayal and death. "They're coming for you again," she warned, clutching a USB drive in trembling fingers. "The Chinese, they've regrouped with new leadership, and they know about your baby. They think your children are the ultimate leverage against you." The warning triggered immediate security protocols, but unlike months before, Carter remained calm and methodical. "Thank you for the risk you took in coming here," he told the woman with unexpected compassion, providing her with resources to disappear safely. As their security team implemented protective measures, Alice felt the first sharp contraction grip her abdomen, a gasp escaping her lips as she realized the stress had triggered early labor. "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "She's coming now." What followed was a chaotic dance of preparations. Medical staff rushed to their penthouse as escape routes were simultaneously secured. Carter refused to leave Alice's side despite the tactical disadvantage, his priorities now unquestionably clear. "I need you to be strong," Carter whispered against Alice's hair as another contraction seized her, his calm presence anchoring her through the pain. "Our daughter is determined to make a dramatic entrance, just like her mother did into my life." Hours later, as dawn broke over Manhattan, their daughter entered the world with a defiant cry that made both parents laugh through tears of exhaustion and joy. They named her Hope, a testament to what had grown between them despite impossible beginnings. While mother and newborn daughter rested, Carter received word that the Chinese threat had been neutralized, not through violence, but through an unexpected diplomatic channel. His legitimate business connections had provided leverage that his criminal empire never could have accessed. The hospital room had been transformed into a fortress of flowers, stuffed animals, and state-of-the-art security, a jarring contrast that perfectly symbolized their unique family dynamic. Carter's former rivals had sent extravagant gifts alongside veiled acknowledgments that his family was permanently off-limits, a different kind of respect than he'd commanded through fear. Madeline had taken to her role as big sister with characteristic determination, creating handmade books of stories in multiple languages for Hope to learn when she was older. The little girl who had once saved a stranger's life now appointed herself guardian of her baby sister, whispering promises of protection in languages Carter couldn't identify. Alice watched Carter cradle their daughter with hands that had once ordered executions now impossibly gentle, as he counted tiny fingers and toes with wonder. The dichotomy of the man he had been, and the father he was becoming, struck her most in these unguarded moments, his redemption unfolding not through grand gestures, but through these small acts of tenderness. "It's really over," Carter told Alice when she awoke, carefully placing their sleeping daughter in her arms. "Not through bloodshed, but through alliances with people who share our interest in stability and prosperity. The right kind of power, after all." Madeline climbed carefully onto the bed, peering with wonder at her baby sister's tiny features. "She has your eyes, Mommy, but she looks fierce like Max when she frowns," she observed with childlike perception, bridging their bloodlines with simple truth. As Carter gathered his family close, the journey from that fateful night on Fifth Avenue to this moment of perfect belonging seemed both impossible and inevitable. A little girl's warning in a language she shouldn't have understood had sparked a transformation none of them could have predicted. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content here.